The bullet grazed Vincent Brennan's shoulder as he spurred his horse toward the mouth of Red Canyon, and he knew with absolute certainty that Marshal Harker and his men were already positioned in those sandstone walls. But nothing in this world or the next could stop him, because Amelia Richardson was somewhere beyond that narrow passage, and he would ride through hell itself to reach her. It was September of 1878, and the Nevada desert stretched endless and unforgiving in every direction from Lovelock, the small mining town that had become both a sanctuary and a prison, depending on which side of the law a man stood. Vincent had arrived there 6 months earlier, a drifter looking for honest work and a chance to outrun a past that clung to him like the dust that settled on everything in this God-forsaken territory. He had found employment at the Silver Ridge mine, hauling ore and keeping his head down, saving every dollar he earned with no particular plan except survival. The first time he saw Amelia was on a Tuesday morning in late March when the desert was just beginning to shake off winter's chill. She had been standing outside the general store, her dark auburn hair catching the sunlight in a way that made his breath catch in his throat. She wore a simple calico dress the color of sage, and she was arguing with the shopkeeper about the price of flour with such passionate conviction that Vincent found himself smiling for the first time in months. He had not meant to stare, but she must have felt his gaze because she turned suddenly, her green eyes meeting his with a directness that startled him. Most women in Lovelock kept their eyes downcast around strangers, but Amelia Richardson looked at him as if she were taking his measure and finding him wanting. Then she lifted her chin, gathered her parcels, and walked away without a word. Vincent learned her name from the other miners that evening. Amelia Richardson had come to Lovelock 2 years prior with her father, a surveyor named Robert Richardson, who had contracted with the mining companies to map new claims. Her mother had died during the journey west, and Amelia had stayed on after her father completed his work, taking a position as a schoolteacher for the handful of children in town. She lived in a small house at the edge of Lovelock, kept to herself mostly, and according to the men who spoke of her with equal parts admiration and frustration, she had turned down every proposal of marriage she had received. Vincent told himself he had no business thinking about her. He was 26 years old with nothing to his name but a horse, a saddle, and the clothes on his back. He had left Texas under circumstances that still haunted his dreams, and he had promised himself that he would not put down roots anywhere until he could be certain the past would not catch up with him. But Lovelock was a small town, and their paths crossed with increasing frequency. He would see her walking to the schoolhouse in the mornings, books tucked under her arm. She would be in the mercantile when he came to buy supplies, or at the church on Sunday mornings, sitting in the third pew from the front. Each time, he felt that same pull, that same inexplicable certainty that she was someone who mattered, even though they had never exchanged more than a polite nod. The first real conversation happened in May, during a spring storm that blew in with unexpected fury. Vincent had been riding back from the mine when the sky opened up, and he sought shelter under the awning of the schoolhouse. Amelia was inside, tidying up after her students had left, and when she saw him standing there soaked to the bone, she opened the door. "You will catch your death standing out there," she said, her voice carrying a hint of the East Coast, though he could not place exactly where. "Come inside until the worst of it passes." He hesitated, water dripping from the brim of his hat. "I do not want to impose, miss." "It is hardly an imposition to show basic human decency," she replied, stepping back to allow him entry. "Besides, you are already dripping on my floor, so you might as well come all the way in." The schoolhouse was a single room with a pot-bellied stove in the corner, rows of simple wooden desks, and a blackboard covered in the day's arithmetic lessons. It smelled of chalk and paper, and something faintly floral that he realized was coming from Amelia herself. She moved to the stove and began stoking the fire, adding wood with practiced efficiency. "I have seen you around town," she said without turning around. "You work at the Silver Ridge." "Yes, miss. My name is Vincent Brennan." "I know," she said, and now she did turn to face him, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Lovelock is not exactly a metropolis, Mr. Brennan. Everyone knows everyone, whether they want to or not." He found himself smiling back. "Then you have me at a disadvantage, because all I know is your name." "And what exactly would you like to know?" There was something challenging in her tone, but also something playful, and Vincent felt the walls he had built around himself beginning to crack. They talked for over an hour while the rain hammered against the roof. He told her about growing up in Texas, about his mother who had taught him to read, and his father who had taught him to rope cattle. He left out the parts about why he had left, the violence and the accusations, but he told her about the journey west and his hope to make something of himself. She told him about Philadelphia, where she had grown up in a house with more books than furniture, and about her father's dream of mapping the frontier, and about her mother's grave in a nameless patch of desert, 3 days' ride from Lovelock. "I should have gone back east after she died," Amelia said, staring into the fire. "I had cousins in Pennsylvania who would have taken me in, but I could not bear the thought of leaving her out here alone, and besides, these children need a teacher, so I stayed." "Do you regret it?" Vincent asked. She considered the question seriously before answering. "Sometimes I miss the theater and the libraries and the way the trees turn in autumn, but no, I do not regret it. There is something honest about this place, something real. People are what they are here, without pretense." When the rain finally stopped, Vincent reluctantly took his leave, but something had shifted between them. Over the following weeks, they found excuses to talk more often. He would stop by the schoolhouse on his way back from the mine, ostensibly to check that everything was secure, but really just to see her. She would ask his opinion on books she was thinking of ordering for her students, or invite him to attend a poetry reading she was organizing at the church. The town began to notice, of course. In a place like Lovelock, privacy was a luxury no one could afford. Vincent heard the whispers, saw the knowing looks, but he did not care. For the first time since leaving Texas, he felt like he was building something that mattered, something real. It was Amelia who kissed him first, on a warm June evening when they had taken a walk along the creek that ran behind the town. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold, and they had been talking about nothing in particular when she suddenly stopped walking and turned to face him. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice suddenly serious. "I have spent the last 2 years convincing myself that I was content alone, that I did not need anyone else. But that was a lie, Vincent. I was just afraid." "Afraid of what?" he asked, though his heart was already racing because he thought he knew what she was going to say. "Afraid of this," she said, and then she stood on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, questioning, but then Vincent's arms came around her and he pulled her close, and it became something deeper, something that felt like coming home after years of wandering. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Amelia's cheeks were flushed. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," she admitted. "So have I," Vincent said, and then he kissed her again because now that he had started, he could not imagine ever stopping. They courted properly after that, though the rules of propriety were somewhat relaxed on the frontier. He would take her riding on Sunday afternoons, and she would pack picnic lunches that they would eat in the shade of the cottonwood trees along the creek. They would sit on her porch in the evenings, talking about their dreams and their fears, building a shared future one conversation at a time. Vincent knew he should tell her about Texas, about the men who had died and the accusations that had followed him, but every time he tried to find the words, they stuck in his throat. He told himself that it did not matter, that he had done nothing wrong and the past was behind him, but the truth was that he was terrified of seeing her look at him differently, of losing what they had built. It was Marshal Carl Harker who brought the past crashing back into Vincent's present. Harker rode into Lovelock on a scorching July afternoon with 3 deputies and a stack of wanted posters. He was a hard man with cold eyes and a reputation for never giving up on a trail, no matter how old. Vincent was at the saloon when Harker walked in, and the moment their eyes met, Vincent knew his time in Lovelock was over. "Vincent Brennan," Harker said, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. "You are wanted in Texas for the murder of James Cordell and the theft of $2,000 in banknotes." The entire saloon went silent. Vincent stood slowly, his hands held carefully away from his own weapon. "I did not murder anyone, Marshal. Cordell drew on me first." "It was self-defense, and there were witnesses who saw it." "That is for a judge to decide," Harker said. "You ran before you could stand trial, which makes you a fugitive. Now you can come peacefully or we can do this the hard way." Vincent's mind raced. He had not stolen any money, and he had only shot Cordell after the man had pulled a gun on him during a dispute over a poker game. But Cordell had been the nephew of a powerful rancher, and Vincent had known that no jury in that part of Texas would believe a drifter over a wealthy man's kin. So he had run, and in running he had made himself look guilty. "I will come peacefully," Vincent said finally, unbuckling his gun belt and laying it on the bar. "But I am telling you the truth. I am not a murderer." Harker's expression did not change. "Like I said, that is for a judge to decide." They locked Vincent in the small jail at the edge of town, a single cell with iron bars and a window too small to climb through. Harker informed him that they would be leaving for Texas in the morning, and that he should make his peace with whatever God he believed in, because the penalty for murder was hanging. Vincent sat on the narrow cot and put his head in his hands. He had been so close to something good, something real, and now it was all falling apart. He wondered if Amelia had heard yet, wondered what she would think when she learned that the man she had been courting was wanted for murder. He did not have to wonder long. As the sun was setting, he heard footsteps outside the jail and then Amelia's voice, sharp and insistent. "I demand to see Vincent Brennan immediately." The deputy on duty, a young man named Ellis who looked barely old enough to shave, mumbled something about regulations, but Amelia was not to be deterred. "I am going to see him, deputy, with or without your permission. Now open that door." A moment later she appeared in front of his cell, her eyes blazing with anger and fear. Ellis retreated to give them what privacy he could, though he stayed close enough to ensure nothing improper occurred. "Tell me it is not true," Amelia said, gripping the bars. "Tell me you are not a murderer." Vincent stood and walked to the bars, covering her hands with his own. "I am not a murderer, Amelia. I swear to you on everything I hold sacred. A man drew on me and I defended myself. That is all." "Then why did you run?" He took a deep breath. "Because the man I killed was connected to powerful people, and I knew I would not get a fair trial. I thought if I left Texas, I could start over somewhere else. I thought I could outrun it." Tears were streaming down her face now. "You should have told me." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "I wanted to, Amelia. Every day I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid you would look at me the way you are looking at me now." "And how am I looking at you?" she demanded. "Like I am a stranger. Like you do not know me at all." She was silent for a long moment, and Vincent felt his heart shattering. Then she squeezed his hands tighter. "I am looking at you like someone who is terrified of losing the man she loves," she said fiercely. "You understand me, Vincent Brennan. I love you, and I am not going to let them take you away." Hope flared in his chest. "Amelia, there is nothing you can do. Harker has the law on his side." "Then the law is wrong," she said, "and I will find a way to prove it." She left soon after, and Vincent tried to sleep, though rest would not come. He kept replaying her words in his mind. She loved him. Even knowing what he was accused of, she loved him. It was more than he deserved, and it gave him something to hold onto in the darkness. The next morning, Harker came for him at dawn. They shackled his hands and prepared to leave, and Vincent was just about to mount his horse when a commotion erupted at the edge of town. A rider was coming in fast, and as he got closer, Vincent recognized him as Tom Whitmore, one of the miners from Silver Ridge. "Marshal," Whitmore shouted, pulling his horse to a stop. "There has been trouble at the Richardson place. Someone broke in during the night and took Miss Amelia." Vincent's blood turned to ice. "What?" Harker turned to Whitmore, his expression sharp. "Explain." "I was riding past her house this morning and saw the door was open. When I looked inside, the place was torn apart and there was blood on the floor. Not much, but enough. And there was a note nailed to the door." Harker took the note and read it aloud. "If you want the girl alive, bring Vincent Brennan to Red Canyon by sunset tomorrow. Come alone and unarmed, or she dies." Vincent lunged forward, but the deputies held him back. "Who took her? Who did this?" Harker studied the note, his expression unreadable. "This looks like the work of the Cordell family. They must have followed me here, figured they would take matters into their own hands." "Then we have to go after them," Vincent said desperately. "We have to get her back." "We are not doing anything," Harker said. "This is clearly a trap. They want to lure you out into the open so they can kill you themselves." "I do not care if it is a trap," Vincent shouted. "I am going after her." Harker regarded him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you might be telling the truth about Cordell," he said. "No guilty man would be this desperate to save someone else. But that does not change the fact that you are still wanted in Texas, and I still have a job to do." "Marshal, please," Vincent said, and he did not care that he was begging. "Let me go after her. If I do not make it back, then your problem is solved. But if I do, I will stand trial. I will face whatever judgment comes. Just let me try to save her." Harker was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then he turned to his deputies. "Unshackle him." "But Marshal," one of them protested. "I said unshackle him," Harker repeated, "and give him his gun back." As the shackles fell away, Harker leaned in close. "You have until tomorrow at sunset. If you are not back by then, I will hunt you down myself, and this time there will be no second chances." Vincent nodded, rubbing his wrists. "Thank you, Marshal." "Do not thank me yet," Harker said. "Red Canyon is a death trap. High walls, narrow passage, plenty of places for shooters to hide. If the Cordells are waiting for you there, you will not make it 10 feet before they cut you down." "Then I will die trying," Vincent said simply. He retrieved his horse and supplies, checking his rifle and revolver to ensure they were loaded. Several of the miners offered to come with him, but he refused. This was his fight, and he would not risk anyone else's life. Besides, the note had been clear. Come alone or Amelia would die. The ride to Red Canyon took the better part of a day. It was located about 30 miles northeast of Lovelock, a narrow gorge carved through red sandstone by centuries of wind and water. Vincent had heard of it but had never been there himself. As he rode, his mind raced with plans and contingencies, but every scenario ended the same way. He was riding into an ambush, and his chances of survival were minimal at best. But Amelia was on the other side of that canyon, and he would go through hell itself to reach her. He arrived at the mouth of the canyon as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. The walls rose up on either side, maybe 100 feet high, striped in shades of red and orange and cream. The passage itself was barely wide enough for 2 horses to walk abreast, and it stretched ahead for what looked like a quarter-mile before opening up into a wider area. Vincent dismounted and studied the terrain. There were dozens of places where men could hide, dozens of angles from which they could shoot. He could see scuff marks in the dirt that suggested recent activity, and when he looked closely at the canyon walls, he thought he could make out the shapes of men positioned on the ledges above. He knew the canyon was a trap. Every instinct he had screamed at him to turn around to find another way to wait for help. But there was no other way, and help would not arrive in time, and Amelia was somewhere beyond that narrow passage, possibly hurt, definitely terrified. Vincent checked his weapons one last time, said a silent prayer to a god he was not sure he believed in, and mounted his horse. Then he spurred the animal forward and rode into Red Canyon. The first shot came when he was about 50 feet in, the bullet kicking up dirt just in front of his horse's hooves. The animal reared, and Vincent fought to keep control, his eyes scanning the walls above. He could see them now, at least 4 men positioned on the ledges, rifles trained on him. "That is far enough, Brennan," a voice called down. It was thick with a Texas drawl, and Vincent recognized it immediately. Luther Cordell, James's older brother, a man with a reputation for brutality that made his nephew look like a choir boy. Vincent reined in his horse, keeping his hands visible. "Where is she, Cordell?" "Somewhere safe," Luther called back. "For now, whether she stays that way depends on you." "The note said to come alone and unarmed," Vincent said. "I came alone. But I will not give up my weapons until I see that Amelia is unharmed." Luther laughed, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. "You are in no position to make demands, boy. You killed my nephew, and now you are going to pay for it." "Your nephew drew on me first," Vincent shouted back. "I had witnesses. He cheated at cards, I called him on it, and he went for his gun. I only defended myself." "That is not how I heard it," Luther said. "Way I heard it, you shot an unarmed man and stole $2,000 that did not belong to you." "Then you heard wrong," Vincent said. "I never stole anything. This whole thing is a lie, and you know it." There was a long silence. Then Luther said, "Maybe you are right. Maybe James was a cheat and a liar, and maybe he did draw first, but he was still my blood, and blood demands blood. So here is what is going to happen. You are going to get off that horse, lay down your weapons, and walk through this canyon. If you make it to the other side, you can have your girl, but I would not count on that happening." Vincent's mind raced. It was a death sentence, plain and simple. The moment he dismounted and disarmed, they would shoot him down like a dog, but if he refused, they would kill Amelia. He was trapped, and Luther knew it. "How do I know you will let her go?" Vincent called back. "You do not," Luther said flatly, "but it is the only chance you have got." Vincent took a deep breath, steeling himself. Then he dismounted, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He unbuckled his gun belt and laid it on the ground, then pulled his rifle from its scabbard and laid that down as well. He looked up at the walls, at the men watching him, and he saw death in their eyes. "I am walking through," he said. "And if you shoot me before I see Amelia alive and well, I swear on everything holy that you will regret it." Luther laughed again. "You will not be in any position to make me regret anything, boy. Now walk." Vincent started forward, his boots scuffing against the rocky ground. Every step felt like it might be his last. He could feel the rifles trained on him, could almost sense the fingers tightening on triggers. The canyon walls seemed to close in around him, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows that made the passage feel even more claustrophobic. He had made it maybe 20 feet when he heard a sound that made his heart soar and sink at the same time. Amelia's voice, calling his name. "Vincent. Do not do this. They are going to kill you." He could see her now at the far end of the canyon where it opened up into a wider area. She was tied to a post, her dress torn and dirty, a bruise darkening her left cheek. But she was alive, and that was all that mattered. "It is going to be all right," he called back, though he knew it was probably a lie. "No, it is not," she shouted, and there were tears in her voice. "Vincent, please just go, save yourself." "I am not leaving without you," he said, and he kept walking. He was halfway through the canyon when he heard the click of hammers being pulled back. This was it. This was where they would cut him down. He braced himself for the bullets, for the pain, for the end. But the shots, when they came, were not aimed at him. They came from above and behind, from the canyon rim on the opposite side from where Luther's men were positioned. Vincent threw himself to the ground and looked up to see Marshal Harker and his deputies firing down on the Cordells, pinning them in place. "Run, Brennan," Harker shouted. "Get to the girl." Vincent did not need to be told twice. He scrambled to his feet and ran, his boots pounding against the ground as bullets whizzed past him. One of the Cordells tried to draw a bead on him, but a shot from Harker knocked the rifle from his hands. Another tried to climb down from his perch, but a deputy's bullet sent him tumbling into the canyon. Vincent reached the end of the passage and kept running, his eyes locked on Amelia. She was struggling against her bonds, crying his name, and when he reached her, he pulled out his knife and started cutting the ropes. "I thought you were dead," she sobbed as the ropes fell away. "I thought they killed you." "Not yet," he said, pulling her into his arms. "Are you hurt?" "Just bruised," she said, clinging to him. "Vincent, how did you know where to find me?" "They sent a note," he said, pulling back to look at her face. "They wanted me to come here so they could kill me." "Then why did you come?" she demanded. "You should have let the marshal handle this." "Because you were on the other side," he said simply. "And there is nowhere in this world I would not go to get to you." She kissed him then, hard and desperate, and he kissed her back, his hands tangling in her hair. The sound of gunfire continued behind them, but for a moment, nothing else existed except the two of them. The gunfight ended as quickly as it had started. With Harker's men on the high ground and the element of surprise on their side, the Cordells had no chance. Luther and two of his men were dead, and the other two had surrendered. Harker climbed down from the canyon rim and made his way to where Vincent and Amelia stood, still holding each other. "You are a lucky man, Brennan," Harker said, though his tone was not unkind. "If Tom Whitmore had not had the sense to come find me after he delivered that note, you would be dead right now." "Thank you, Marshal," Vincent said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. Harker nodded. "I sent a telegram to Texas while you were riding out here." Turns out there were witnesses to the shooting who have been trying to come forward for months. Cordell's uncle had them intimidated into silence, but with him dead and his family in disgrace, they are talking now. "The charges against you have been dropped, Brennan. You are a free man." Vincent felt his knees go weak. "Are you certain?" "Got the telegram right here," Harker said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "Signed by the judge himself. Seems James Cordell was known for cheating at cards, and more than one person saw him draw on you first. You were telling the truth all along." Amelia let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and buried her face in Vincent's chest. He held her close, his own eyes burning with tears he refused to let fall. "What happens now?" Vincent asked. Harker shrugged. "That is up to you. Far as I am concerned, you and Miss Richardson are free to go back to Lovelock and get on with your lives. Though I would recommend doing it quickly, before any more Cordells show up looking for revenge." "There will not be any more," one of the surviving Cordells said bitterly. He was sitting on the ground with his hands tied, blood seeping from a wound in his shoulder. "Luther was the last of us who gave a damn about James. The rest of the family disowned him years ago. You have nothing more to fear from the Cordells." Harker studied the man, then nodded. "See that you spread the word. Vincent Brennan is cleared of all charges, and anyone who comes after him will answer to me." They rode back to Lovelock together, Vincent and Amelia on his horse, Harker and his deputies following behind with their prisoners. The sun had set by the time they arrived, and the town was abuzz with the news. Tom Whitmore and several others came out to greet them, relief evident on their faces. "Miss Amelia," Tom said, touching the brim of his hat, "we are all glad to see you safe." "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore," Amelia said. "I understand you are the one who alerted the marshal. You may well have saved both our lives." Tom's face reddened. "Just did what anyone would have done, miss." Vincent shook the man's hand. "I owe you a debt I can never repay." Over the following days, life in Lovelock slowly returned to normal. Harker and his deputies left with their prisoners, heading back to wherever they had come from. Vincent returned to his work at the mine, though he found it harder than ever to focus on hauling ore when all he could think about was Amelia. She had been examined by the town doctor, who confirmed that aside from some bruising and a few scrapes, she was unharmed. But Vincent could see the shadow of fear in her eyes sometimes, the way she would startle at sudden noises, and he knew that the ordeal had left scars that were not visible on the surface. He visited her every evening, sitting on her porch as the sun set, just being present. Some nights they talked, sharing stories and dreams. Other nights they sat in companionable silence, content simply to be together. Slowly he watched the fear fade from her eyes, replaced by something softer, something that looked like hope. It was 3 weeks after the incident at Red Canyon when Vincent finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been burning in his heart. They were sitting on her porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Amelia had her head resting on his shoulder, and he could feel the steady rhythm of her breathing. "Amelia," he said softly, "I need to ask you something." She lifted her head to look at him. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, his heart hammering in his chest. "I know I do not have much to offer. I am just a miner with a few dollars saved and a past that will probably always follow me. But I love you, Amelia Richardson. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person, and I cannot imagine spending the rest of my life without you." He slid off the porch step and knelt in the dirt in front of her, pulling a small ring from his pocket. It was simple, just a thin gold band with a small turquoise stone, but it had taken him 2 weeks' wages, and it was the finest thing he had ever owned. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice shaking. Amelia's hands flew to her mouth and tears spilled down her cheeks. For a terrifying moment, Vincent thought she was going to say no. Then she nodded, so vigorously that her hair came loose from its pins. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Vincent, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then she was in his arms, kissing him with a passion that made his head spin. When they finally broke apart, both of them were laughing and crying at the same time. "I was so afraid you were going to say no," he admitted. "How could I say no?" she said, cupping his face in her hands. "You rode into a canyon full of men who wanted to kill you just to save me. You are the bravest, most stubborn, most wonderful man I have ever known. Of course I will marry you." They were married a month later, in the small church at the center of Lovelock. It was a simple ceremony, attended by half the town, with Tom Whitmore standing as Vincent's best man and the doctor's wife serving as Amelia's matron of honor. Amelia wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she had ordered from San Francisco, and Vincent wore his best suit, freshly cleaned and pressed. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Vincent kissed Amelia with such tenderness that several of the women in the congregation wiped away tears. The celebration that followed was rowdy and joyful, with music and dancing and more food than any of them could possibly eat. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Vincent and Amelia slipped away to the small house they would now share. It was the same house Amelia had been living in, but Vincent had spent the past month making repairs and improvements, determined to make it a proper home. Their wedding night was everything Vincent had hoped it would be, tender and passionate, and filled with the kind of intimacy that comes from truly knowing another person. Amelia was shy at first, but as the night wore on, she became bolder, and by the time the sun began to rise, they had learned each other in ways that left them both breathless and sated. The first year of their marriage was not without its challenges. Money was tight, especially after Amelia discovered she was pregnant in the spring of 1879. She had to give up her teaching position, though she continued to tutor students in their home, and Vincent took on extra shifts at the mine to make up for the lost income. But they were happy. God, they were happy. Vincent would come home each evening covered in dust and exhausted, and Amelia would meet him at the door with a kiss and a smile that made every hardship worth enduring. They would sit together in the evenings, Vincent's hand resting on her growing belly, talking about the future and the child who would soon join them. Their son was born on a cold December night, 3 weeks before Christmas. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Vincent feared he might lose both Amelia and the baby. But the doctor was skilled, and Amelia was strong, and when Vincent finally heard his son's first cry, he felt something break open in his chest. They named him Robert, after Amelia's father, and from the moment Vincent held that tiny, squalling bundle in his arms, he knew that he would do anything to protect him. Robert had his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair, and he was the most perfect thing Vincent had ever seen. The years that followed were filled with the kind of ordinary joys that make a life worth living. Vincent continued to work at the mine, eventually earning a promotion to foreman. Amelia resumed teaching when Robert was old enough to attend school himself, though she now taught from their home rather than at the schoolhouse. They saved their money carefully, adding on to the house as their family grew. A daughter, Grace, was born 2 years after Robert, with hair the color of honey and a laugh that could light up the darkest room. Then came another son, Samuel, strong and stubborn, and so much like his father that it sometimes made Amelia shake her head in amused exasperation. Life in Lovelock changed around them. The mine began to play out in the mid-1880s, and many of the families moved on to seek their fortunes elsewhere. But Vincent and Amelia stayed, putting down roots that went deeper than silver or gold. Vincent bought a small ranch on the outskirts of town, trading his pickaxe for a lasso, and proved to be as capable with cattle as he had been with ore. The children grew, as children do. Robert became a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books almost as much as his mother did. Grace was wild and fearless, the kind of girl who would climb trees and race horses and refuse to be confined by anyone's expectations. Samuel was somewhere in between, equally at home with a book or a rope, content to follow his own path. There were hard times, of course. A drought in 1886 that nearly wiped out their small herd. The death of Amelia's father in 1889, which hit her harder than she had expected. The year Grace caught scarlet fever and they spent 3 weeks not knowing if she would survive. Vincent and Amelia taking turns sitting by her bedside, praying to a God they both sometimes doubted. But they weathered every storm together, their love deepening with each passing year. Vincent never forgot what it felt like to ride into that canyon, knowing he might die but unable to stop himself because Amelia was on the other side. That moment had defined him, had shown him the kind of man he was capable of being, and he tried to live up to that standard every day. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Amelia back to Red Canyon. She had protested at first, saying she had no desire to revisit the place where she had been held captive, but Vincent had insisted. "Trust me," he had said, and so she did. They rode out in the early morning, leaving the children with Tom Whitmore and his wife. The canyon looked different in the daylight, less menacing, just a passage carved through stone by the patient work of wind and water. They rode through it slowly, Vincent pointing out the places where Luther's men had hidden, where Harker had positioned his deputies. When they reached the spot where Vincent had cut Amelia free, he dismounted and helped her down from her horse. Then he pulled a blanket from his saddlebag and spread it on the ground. "What are we doing?" Amelia asked, bemused. "Reclaiming this place," Vincent said. "I do not want your memories of this canyon to be about fear and captivity. I want you to remember it as the place where I proved how much I love you, and where our life together truly began." They spent the afternoon there, talking and laughing and making love under the vast Nevada sky. And when they finally rode back to Lovelock, as the sun was setting, Amelia's memories of Red Canyon had indeed been transformed into something precious. The years continued to pass. Robert grew into a tall, serious young man who surprised everyone by deciding to become a lawyer, using the education his parents had scrimped and saved to provide. He moved to San Francisco to study, promising to return to Nevada once he had established himself. Grace, true to her nature, fell in love with a wild horse wrangler when she was 19 and married him despite her parents' concerns. But the wrangler, a man named Daniel Cross, proved to be steady and hardworking, and he treated Grace with the kind of respect and adoration that put Vincent's mind at ease. Samuel took over the ranch when he was 21, proving to have a natural talent for raising cattle and horses. He married a quiet girl named Hannah from the neighboring town, and together they built the ranch into something truly prosperous. Vincent and Amelia watched their children grow and leave, creating lives of their own, and they took pride in the adults they had become. But they also relished the quiet that came with an empty house, the freedom to focus entirely on each other after so many years of divided attention. They grew old together, their bodies changing but their love remaining constant. Vincent's hair turned gray, then white, and his hands became gnarled from years of hard work. Amelia's face gained lines that mapped out decades of laughter and tears, and her auburn hair faded to silver. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration that brought together what felt like half of Nevada. Robert came from San Francisco with his wife and 2 children. Grace and Daniel arrived from their ranch in Montana with their 4 rambunctious boys. Samuel and Hannah, who still lived nearby, brought their 3 daughters. The party was held at the ranch, under the same cottonwood trees where Vincent and Amelia had shared their first picnic all those years ago. There was music and dancing and so much laughter that it seemed to echo across the desert. As the sun began to set, Vincent took Amelia's hand and led her away from the crowd, to a spot overlooking the creek. They sat together on the bank, their shoulders touching, watching the water flow past. "Do you remember the first time I kissed you?" Amelia asked, a smile playing at her lips. "Right here by this creek," Vincent said. "How could I forget? It was the moment my life truly began." "We have built a good life, have we not?" she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "The best life," Vincent agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible when I rode into Lovelock all those years ago." Do you ever regret it? Amelia asked. Riding into that canyon knowing it was a trap, Vincent was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Then he shook his head. Not for a single second. I knew the canyon was a trap, Amelia. I knew I would probably die, but you were on the other side and that was all that mattered. I would make the same choice again, every time without hesitation. She turned to look at him, her green eyes still as bright as they had been when she was 22. I love you, Vincent Brennan. I have loved you for 30 years, and I will love you for however many years we have left. And I love you, Amelia Brennan, he said, using her married name with the same pride he had felt the first time he said it. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. They kissed as the sun set, the same way they had kissed by this creek 3 decades earlier, and it felt like coming home. The years continued to pass, slower now, each one more precious than the last. Vincent's body began to fail him in his 70s, the hard work of a lifetime catching up with him. His knees ached in the mornings and his hands sometimes trembled, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for Amelia never wavered. Amelia, too, felt the weight of years. She moved more slowly now, and her eyesight had begun to fade, but she still taught reading to the children in town, and she still greeted Vincent each evening with the same smile that had captured his heart so long ago. They spent their days together, content in the quiet companionship that comes from decades of shared life. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over the desert they had made their home. Sometimes they talked, reminiscing about the past, or discussing the latest letters from their children and grandchildren. Other times they simply sat in silence, finding comfort in each other's presence. It was on a warm spring evening in 1910 that Vincent felt a pain in his chest that he recognized as something serious. He did not tell Amelia, not wanting to worry her, but she knew. After so many years together, she could read him like one of her beloved books. Vincent, she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. What is wrong? Nothing I cannot handle, he said, but his voice was strained. She stood and came to him, taking his hand in both of hers. Do not lie to me. Not now, not after all these years. He looked at her, this woman who had been his partner, his lover, his best friend for more than 3 decades, and he could not bring himself to lie. I think my time is coming, Amelia. I can feel it. She sank down beside him, tears streaming down her face. Not yet, please, not yet. I have had a good life, he said, reaching up to cup her face. A long, happy life, all because of you. If this is the end, I have no regrets. I am not ready to lose you, she sobbed. And I am not ready to leave you, he said. But we do not always get to choose these things. The pain passed after a few minutes, and Vincent insisted he was fine, though they both knew it was only a temporary reprieve. They sent word to their children, and within a week, the house was full again. 3 generations gathered to be with Vincent in what they all sensed might be his final days. But Vincent Brennan was stubborn and he held on. Days turned into weeks, then months. The doctor said it was a miracle, that by all rights Vincent should have died that first night, but Vincent knew better. He was holding on for Amelia, giving her time to prepare, giving them both a few more precious moments together. It was on a cold December night, exactly 50 years after their son Robert had been born, that Vincent finally let go. He was in bed, Amelia beside him, their hands clasped together. The room was dark except for the soft glow of lamplight, and their children and grandchildren were gathered around, creating a circle of love. I love you, Vincent whispered, his voice barely audible. I've loved you from the moment I saw you outside that general store, and I will love you beyond death itself. I love you too, Amelia said, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for riding into that canyon for me. Thank you for choosing me every day for all these years." Vincent smiled, and then he closed his eyes for the last time, his hand still holding hers. Amelia lived for another 5 years after Vincent's death. She stayed in the house they had shared, surrounded by memories and visited often by her children and grandchildren. She spoke of Vincent every day, keeping his memory alive through stories and laughter. She continued to teach reading until the very end, finding purpose in passing on the love of books that had sustained her through so many years. And every evening, she would sit on the porch and watch the sun set, imagining Vincent beside her, his hand in hers. When Amelia finally passed in 1915, she was buried beside Vincent in the small cemetery outside Lovelock. Their graves were marked with simple headstones, but their true monument was the family they had built, the love they had shared, and the legacy they had left behind. Their grandchildren would tell the story for years to come, of the cowboy who rode into a canyon trap because the woman he loved was on the other side, and of the love that had endured through decades of hardship and joy. It became a legend in Lovelock, a reminder that true love was not just a feeling but a choice, made again and again in big moments and small ones, across the span of a lifetime. And in Red Canyon, where it had all begun, the wind still whispered through the sandstone walls, carrying with it the echo of Vincent's words. "I knew the canyon was a trap, but I rode in anyway, because she was on the other side." It was a love story for the ages, played out against the harsh beauty of the Nevada desert, a testament to the power of courage and devotion, and the unshakable belief that some things are worth any risk. Vincent and Amelia Brennan had lived ordinary lives in many ways, working hard, raising children, growing old together. But in the moments that mattered most, they had been extraordinary, choosing love over fear, together over apart, and in doing so, they had created something that would outlast them both. Their great-grandchildren would visit those graves decades later, placing wildflowers on the weathered stones and marveling at the dates carved there. 53 years of marriage, a lifetime of love, all because one man had been brave enough to ride into danger, and one woman had been brave enough to let him. The ranch that Samuel had built continued to thrive for generations, becoming one of the most prosperous in Nevada. Robert's law practice in San Francisco became a family tradition, with his children and grandchildren following in his footsteps. Grace's sons became legendary horse wranglers, known throughout Montana and beyond for their skill and integrity. But more than the material success, what endured was the example Vincent and Amelia had set. They had shown their descendants what it meant to love truly and completely, to put another person's welfare above your own, to choose commitment even when it was difficult. Every marriage in their family tree carried the echo of that first great love, that willingness to ride into danger because the person you loved was on the other side. The town of Lovelock itself changed over the years. The mines closed, new businesses opened, people came and went. But the story of Vincent and Amelia remained, told and retold, embellished and refined, until it became part of the town's identity. They named a street after them, and later a school, small tokens of remembrance for two people who had embodied the best of what the frontier could be. In the end, theirs was a story of choice. Vincent chose to risk everything for love. Amelia chose to trust him, to build a life with him, to stay by his side through every trial. And together, they chose each day to honor the commitment they had made, to be partners in every sense of the word, to create something beautiful and lasting in a harsh and unforgiving land. The canyon still stands, carved deep into the Nevada desert, a monument to forces far older than human love. But for those who know the story, it represents something more. It represents the moment when one man's courage met one woman's worth, when fear gave way to devotion, when everything that came after became possible because of what happened in that narrow passage between stone walls. Vincent Brennan knew the canyon was a trap. He rode in anyway, because Amelia Richardson was on the other side. And in that single choice, in that moment of absolute clarity about what mattered most, he set in motion a love story that would echo through generations. A reminder that the best things in life are worth any risk, any sacrifice, any cost. Their story ended, as all stories must, with death and memory. But it also continued, in the children they raised and the grandchildren who carried their names, in the values they instilled and the example they set. It continued in the whisper of wind through Red Canyon, in the flow of water in the creek where they first kissed, in the sunset over the desert they had called home. And perhaps, in some way that transcends understanding, it continued in whatever comes after this life, in a place where Vincent and Amelia could be together again, where the trials of mortality had no power and love endured forever, unchallenged and undiminished, as bright and true as it had been on that September day in 1878 when a drifter saw a schoolteacher and felt his life change course. That was the real triumph of their story, not the drama of the rescue or the romance of the courtship, but the quiet, steady devotion of 53 years together. The choice to love, made new each morning. The decision to stay, renewed with every sunset. The commitment to build something lasting, honored through decades of work and worry and joy. Vincent knew the canyon was a trap. He rode in anyway. And because he did, because Amelia was waiting on the other side, because love proved stronger than fear, they created something that would outlast them both, a legacy of devotion that would inspire generations yet unborn, a story that proved that in the end, love is always worth the risk.